Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 654. I've got the white pieces. I kicked off with e4. My opponent went to e5. And I go knight f3, normal, all normal moves. And then my opponent chooses d6 here, the Philidor defense, the third choice after knight c6. And defending the pawn and knight f6, counterattacking my e-pawn. So d6, another way of defending the e-pawn. I've actually played that a little bit myself, along with the Steinitz defense to the Ruy-Lopez, which is kind of similar. In a way, it's useful in Blitz because being not such a common move, your opponent may not be expecting it. But I don't know, most players seem to know that the right way to deal with it is to play d4. I saw, when I was playing this, I saw bishop c4 a lot, which I guess is okay as well. But I think d4 is the most principled reply. And then, well, if they go for the bishop g4 line, you can always follow the Morphy game, the Opera House game, Morphy versus the Count and the Duke, and get a good game that way. But anyway, that's not well. You occasionally see that even now, so it's a useful game to know. Anyway, my opponent took, which you see is the top choice here. In the old days, they used to play knight f6 or knight d7 as the main moves here, just trying to hold on to the center. And knight d7 is the Hannum variation. But those are kind of tough positions to play. They're kind of cramped. So at least with this exchange, black is going to have a little bit less space, but there will be some open lines, so not quite as cramped. And black has ideas of expanding on the queen side later, which we saw in the game. He gets in that c5 push, kicking the knight. And now knight f6 is a normal move here, just attacking that pawn, which is momentarily frozen in place because the d-pawn is preventing its progress forward. So that's a pretty logical way to play. Also, g6 is an interesting way to play. I never did that myself, but it looks like try and get a bishop on this diagonal right away, take advantage of that open line there. Anyway, my opponent went bishop e7, a pretty rare move. And I played a rare move myself, bishop d3. Probably it's just better to defend with the knight, and certainly that's the more normal-looking move. But there are some ideas with the bishop on d3. Often in this setup, black will castle kingside, and you can get a quick attack along this diagonal. So it's playable. Anyway, he went knight f6, and let's see, if I had gone knight to c3 here, we would have transposed back into a known position, but I just castled, and so we're out of the book. And it's okay here. White has a slight edge, as I was saying during the game, but it's not not necessarily winning. I mean, black has quite a serviceable position, so there's nothing really for black. There's no reason for black to avoid this line. It seems like it's quite playable. You just have to be willing to kind of maneuver a little bit to get your pieces out. Anyway, c5, kicking the knight. That's a very common idea here. The knight drops back to f3. And then in the commentary, the live commentary, I was a little bit worried about this move c4. Bishop takes c4. And then the chess engine gives knight c6 as the next move for black here and thinks white is doing fine. There is this target, and it's now an isolated pawn, so that's good. Now the question is, oh, and I'm a pawn up. The question is, why can't black take that pawn on e4? So here's a little tactics quiz for you. What's wrong with knight takes e4? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. If he takes on e4, I'm gonna give the answer away now. If he plays knight takes e4, then you have queen to d5, threatening queen takes f7 and taking the knight, and that's a pretty devastating threat. If he doesn't want to be down a piece, he has to retreat the knight, and you take on f7. It's not mate, but I don't know. It might be mate shortly. I didn't look at it in any detail, but just winning the f7 pawn, you stay a pawn up, and the king is displaced. That's a pretty good opening for white. So I really didn't have to be so worried about that pawn push. Anyway, he just castled here. Didn't try anything weird. I go knight c3. He goes a6, also a very common idea. Black's continuing with this queenside expansion. That's where it's easiest for him to expand, and so I try and stop it. And he plays b6. There may have been some alternatives there, but it gives him a square for the bishop. so that makes some sense. I go bishop f4, immediately starting to target one of the weak spots in black's setup, this backwards d pawn here. Now he goes bishop b7, getting his bishop out, taking a look at my e pawn. I decide to add an extra defender. This makes it easier for me to move my other pieces around. He goes knight to c6. I go queen e2. I'm thinking of pushing that pawn forward if I can. Also, if this file opens up, now the bishop is not loose because it's defended by the knight. So there's no immediate tactic here. I was thinking maybe there's a possibility of opening things up and winning a piece here, but not happening. In any case, he defended right away with rook e8. So I just centralized my other rook. I think it's been very logical play so far. He goes queen c8, and I went h3 here. Actually, the chess engine doesn't want to play this way with h3. It thinks, I guess maybe queen c8 was a little bit of a slow move. I didn't look up the alternative there, but it thinks after queen c8, white can start to get a pretty good advantage. Although it is a crazy line here, but I thought it was interesting to look at because it has some ideas here. Put the bishop on this diagonal, taking advantage of this. These pawns are on dark squares, and so these light squares are weak, and the pawns are restrained. So I've managed to hold back his pawns from coming forward, and I have some pretty good pressure on the light squares. And I'm just threatening. It's also immediately threatening to win the d pawn. The bishop and the rook are hitting it. So if he defends, which is not the best move, I just wanted to illustrate this. The chess engine actually wants to give up a pawn there. You have knight g5, coordinated attack of the bishop and the knight on the f7 square. That can be defended, but what's interesting about this position is that it's one of those rare cases where the chess engine wants to give up two pieces for a rook and a pawn. But you'll see why it actually turns into a rook and two pawns, and a bit of a dominating position for white here. So, but you have to, this is why computers are better than people. You have to be able to calculate ahead quite a bit to see that. So watch this sequence, though. It's pretty interesting. So you take here, he takes, you take. So all that's straightforward, right? You've dragged black's king out a little bit, so that's worth something, and you've gained a rook and a pawn. But usually that's not enough when you give up two pieces in the middle game. A rook and a pawn are not enough. But it continues here. Knight d5, hitting the queen and the bishop, and so black naturally would want to trade that off. And then instead of taking back right away, here's where it starts to get tricky. You throw in this check, queen h5 check. The king runs back to safety. You grab the knight with check. The king runs all the way over here. And then you grab this pawn. And so this is the position, the chess engine. So what's happened here? Oh, you've got two pawns plus the rook, and you've given up two pieces. So and looks like maybe there's some more trades in store here. But also look at how white's pieces are just beautifully placed, all of them in the center of the board, looking out and towards black's back rank there. And black's pieces are all kind of hovered over here. Although, it looks like there may be some tempo attacks on the queen as well. So it's not immediately obvious to me that this is so much better for white, but the chess engine likes it a lot. And certainly it would be difficult to calculate that whole sequence in advance, right? Say you're in this position, you might see right here, you might see bishop c4 and knight g5, and then you notice that rook f8 would defend, and you probably stop at that point. If you calculate all the way through, would you notice that there's a queen h5 check in that sequence that would pick up a knight over here? Hard to say. Anyway, I just played h3, and the game continues in normal channels. He goes h6, and I went queen f1. I was kind of still planning to push this pawn forward, and I didn't want his rook opening up against my queen. And now his next move is actually a mistake. If he would play something like, there's a number of moves that black can play that will give him a reasonable game. Knight b4 was maybe the top choice of the engine, and that makes a lot of sense. Just trying to harass this bishop here, seeing if I want to trade it off or move it. And but there were other moves as well. The knight could go to d5, and the queen could come back towards the center. Yeah, it's just not clear what the queen is doing on c8, although it's getting out of the way of the rook, I suppose. Anyway, different things that black could try, but knight h7 is a mistake, and it's because, well, one of the ideas of knight h7 is just to support the bishop coming here and trading off some more pieces to kind of relieve the somewhat cramped position that black has. But it turns out this just fails tactically, and we see why in the game. So knight h7 is the start of black's downhill slide here. I just play the normal developing move, knight d5, because when he played knight to h7, he's given up control of the d5 square. So that's I guess the key reason why knight h7 is not working. And now my my knight is hitting the pawn on g. My knight is hitting the pawn on g. b6 there, rather, which is undefended, so it's pretty tricky. If he tries to defend it, though, queen d5, it's also, well, the bishop didn't need defense, but defending the pawn, and then I can now push on with e5. So my plan of pushing on with e5 would have come to fruition here. If he takes, I take, and this is another interesting computer sequence. He takes. Taking back with the rook is the engine suggestion, and then after bishop takes with the rook. And here's the point. That was all a bunch of trades, but the queen can't take the rook. I mean, it looks like it was a bunch of trades where black won a piece, but at the end of that, the queen cannot take the rook because of bishop takes h7 check, winning the queen. So the rook is, let's erase those arrows, the rook is indirectly defended there. So the result of all those trades means that he has to move his queen out of the way, and this is a position where the material is even, but I have the bishop pair, which is a slight material edge, but more importantly I have just kind of a dominating control of the center here with those rooks nicely lined up on the e-file. So a great position for white. So that's best play for black, actually. And what he played here, bishop to g5, this allows me to do some exchanges with tempo, and then at the end of that, take on b6 here, which forks the queen and the rook. So I'm winning a pawn and the exchange. And so I just have a winning edge. That's kind of why I went over more detail in the earlier part of the game. Everything from here on out, I'm just winning. There was no big mistakes. So actually, this, from my point of view, is a pretty well played game. I didn't make any blunders this game, so that's nice. Anyway, so we take these guys off, and then take on b6. And I wanted to get those exchanges out of the way first because I could do it with tempo, and then I'm just winning material here. And I didn't want him suddenly taking on f3 with check or something like that. So I really wanted to trade everything off. Also, it'll be easier to win with less material. So his queen runs away. I grab the rook in the corner. He takes back. And then I think we can kind of step through the rest of the game. I keep that advantage the whole way through. In fact, I even win another pawn here. I forgot about that. And so he keeps playing, but you know, he's just down so much material that he really has no great hope. I just need to hold on to my material and avoid any tricks with his knight. There's always these little tricks of, you know, knight take f3, for example, utilizing the pin. So I have to be wary of things like that, or the pin here. So maybe the f pawn push would be awkward at some point. But well, I managed to stay alert enough. And when we get the queens off, really I don't think black has any chance at all at this point with so many pawns that he gave up on purpose. I mean, he gave up those pawns to try and get some play. And that's what you should do when you're down in material, try and get a complicated position. But at this point, he decided to give up. He's down a whole rook. And I was having some mating ideas, but I couldn't find a checkmate. And there's no immediate mate that the chess engine found. It said it's like mate in 12 at one point. But, you know, the idea is to push this pawn forward, taking away that square, and then you could check here and check here, and that would be a nice nice little mating pattern. But as soon as I push this pawn forward, he can also move one of his pawns to give his king a little space. So that would only work if you're able to push that pawn with the tempo. Anyway, nice game. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.